Hello, hello. Welcome to basically a special edition. We're having an extended conversation tonight because we didn't get to cover everything we want to cover because I was just kind of hammering some points. I just had to hammer those things down before we really moved on. And so we kind of lost one of our main points of the discussion. And because, it's so important and it happened, and I can't really go without speaking about it. Like I feel like if you're not talking about this and you're doing political analysis, I feel like you've kind of missed a gem. There's so much that can be learned from the conflict that I'm about to talk about. And so the conflict is basically Cornel West versus Ta-Nehisi Coates. And I feel like, I've read some articles, one that was like, forget about them, we need to be doing this. And it's like, no, 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 no. I think, this tension between what's going on can be explained by a lot of things, but there's a couple of things that we need to be clear about that are underneath those superficial things. Some people say, it's a personal problem between two people, maybe not, maybe it's like a jealousy thing, maybe it's a hate thing. I don't know why we always call somebody who brings a legitimate critique against somebody always hating. Maybe it could be coming from a hateful place, maybe they could have said it better, but that doesn't mean what they're saying isn't true, right? So I believe that Cornel West, when he wrote what he wrote, that Ta-Nehisi Coates is the black neoliberal face. I'm sorry, is the neoliberal face of the black struggle. Forgive me for kind of mixing up the words there. I know that's not the exact title, but when he makes that case, I don't have any argument against what he brings forth, because I think in many ways Ta-Nehisi Coates, is open to that criticism. He's vulnerable to that criticism just from kind of what he writes about and the way he presents topics. Like this could be something that, really kind of points to his limitations. And this is not about, him not being from academia or anything like that. I believe in autodidactic individuals. I believe in homegrown intellectuals. I believe in that 100%. Never will you hear me say that that's not a good thing, but we need to make sure that that homegrown intellectual really is pushing the envelope and putting forth, all of what they can, within the platform. And he's a really, really visible face. He's been everywhere. Like I've been watching talks, from professors and stuff like that are doing real research and putting out books. And, for some reason he's on the stage. And to me, this is not a dig on him, but to me, I'm asking myself, when you think about the content that these professors are putting out, like, why is he on the stage? He seems out of place. Like, why is he there? But for some reason, there's people who believe his being there is contiguous with what the professor's saying, and I'm like, not really. Like, this person is somebody who's put in a lot of research and is doing things that's kind of important to the theoretical framework. And then you have a writer who's there who doesn't really expose a lot of what this professor's talking about to the general audience. Like if he were there taking this professor's notes, read the book, and he goes out and then writes his own article that kind of summarizes it and kind of, brings it down a little bit so that normal people can really get the meat and potatoes of the arguments that the professor presented. If he was doing that on a consistent basis, then I would say he belongs on the same stage. But since that's not what he does, I just felt like he was out of place. And that's not me hating. That's just me being honest. A just distinction between individuals. That's what I like to think about here. Just distinctions. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, Ta-Nehisi Coates isn't one I would give credit for dumbing things down so that everybody can get it. But I mean, I think he does present things in a way that can help a lot of people, articulates things in a way that can elicit emotional and responses, and a lot of people like that style of writing. As far as well, go ahead.
I was gonna say, I think, I kind of was a little bit harsh, in what I was talking about, but that's in that one particular instance that I was bringing that up. Like I think I'm sorry guys, I keep looking at myself here, and it's like my camera's like bent or sitting sideways. So it keeps appearing as though that like I'm like sitting like slanted like this. So I have to like slant myself to look straight in the camera. So it's really annoying to me.
I don't think that's something
with that.
I might be able to fix that on my end, but I'm not.
No. Don't do anything with it. We'll fix it later on. But that's why you guys see me. I'm kind of like doing this like all the time because I'm sitting straight. But on the camera, it just shows me kind of like with a little slight bend. and so it's getting on my nerves. Going back to what I was talking about, though, I was very, very harsh in what I just said. Ta-Nehisi Coates, writers like him do have a place. Like being able to elicit emotional, strong responses and speaking to the experiences of people such that you grow a following and that you have a lot of people, looking to your writing for release and expression. That's great. That is absolutely great. That thing does have a place. But when you're a writer and you have a platform and as many people look to you as they do, and then you think about the conditions of the Black community, the community that you're supposedly focused on based on your writing, right? He's always kind of putting a Black people first kind of focus, and that's who really reads his work, and that's the kind of circles he's traveling in and things of that nature. He's concerned with the Black identity and the Black struggle in America. You have to kind of push the envelope. You have to move forward. I mean, because I feel like Ta-Nehisi Coates, and pardon my French, he kind of gets everybody all the way to the precipice of where they're trying to go, and then he just doesn't go anywhere. Like, he gets everybody in an emotional response. He wrote an article where he made an impassioned moral case for the reparations argument. But then it's like, okay, this is a great case for reparation, but what did he do with it? He brought us all the way to the point. It's like, all right, we're here. And then he goes, but Bernie Sanders doesn't believe in reparations. It's like, well, wait a minute. If you're trying to engage in a struggle between like two people in a political climate where everybody sees stuff as binary, don't just criticize one candidate. It's not like Hillary Clinton was any better than Bernie Sanders on the argument of reparations, right? But he just kind of let it hang out there, a critique on one, but not the critique on the other, and then try to say, well, I support Bernie Sanders. But it's like, at that time you said that, you should have made it clear that Hillary Clinton was also, kind of like problematic on the issue of reparations. And you just kind of levied a critique on one individual. And it just kind of seemed out of place. And then on top of that, you have this weird fawning over Barack Obama. Like, you wrote a book that said 8 years when we were in power. And it's just like, for somebody who's really steeped in the struggle of African Americans in America, like, how can you write a book like that with that type of title? And then and you do an interview with Barack Obama, and you guys are talking about basketball, and then when you write about it, it's just like this endless fawning without any real critique to Obama, his policies, the history, or his nothing. And it's just like, what do you do with that? And it's because you did that Cornel West wrote this article, and it's because you did that when he wrote this article, it just sticks. It hits home. And you can say you don't want to be a part of this. Nobody's above critique. Nobody is above critique. You can you can have your friends and allies make critiques of Dr. Cornel West. Lord knows, a lot of people lost faith in Cornel West after he levied a critique against Obama. Even though that critique was accurate, they didn't like the way he did it. And I'm going to speak about that, but I want to bring Richard in.
Yeah, from what I've gathered in my understanding, I was only partially engaged in the dispute itself, but the part of Coates' defense was he didn't see himself as an expert in the relevant neoliberal aspects and how Wall Street influences these things, and that's why it didn't reflect in his writing as much, although he did get defensive right away and try and quote some examples of where he did, from what I followed on the Twitter side of the thing, the whole whatever you want to call it. But what I think you mentioned and is important is when he wrote that book, the fawning and praising goes above and beyond an omission by lack of expertise into making it seem like that wasn't an important part of what Barack Obama was as the first black president, and what I think a lot of people may think of as the first black imperial, or like the first black imperialist head of the United States.
You know what? You just said something very important. I kind of glossed over that my damn self, right? Like, I just totally forgot that, like, when you have this type of weird cheerleading that he was doing, when he wrote that, like, it totally abdicated Obama of any type of responsibility for the state of Black America in the United States. And I feel like that's problematic. And I feel like that was definitely a mistake by Coates, and it really seems like a huge blind spot. Like if you're really going to engage in that arena, if you want to roll in those circles that you're rolling in, you've got to be speaking truth to power, not just up there cheerleading the powerful.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I know immediately when Obama started, when during the campaign, when he started taking money from Wall Street, that concerned me, and I was like, okay, this maybe this is just some good finessing. I'll keep my fingers crossed and hope for the best. And as Obama's policy started to roll out, it became more and more clear. But what really struck to me, the disconnect that I saw on the left and versus liberals or whatever, was the droning campaign, when we started to get reports that 9 out of 10 of the people killed by drone bombs were not the people that were the targets, so were victims and of varying degrees of innocence depending on what school of thought you subscribe to, but they weren't the targets. 9 out of 10, and that should upset anybody that claims to be on the left, but it seemed to go by almost without comment for a lot of people on the left that call themselves liberals, or part of the resistance and so on and so forth, or people that fawn over missing Obama and no scandals during the Obama administration, and that line of thought that we see expressed on Twitter and elsewhere, and it's troublesome for me. Go ahead.
I think what you're talking about there is kind of emblematic of what we were discussing before on the earlier part of the show before we got into this extended conversation. Please check that out, by the way. And remember, this is an extended conversation with the Takedown. I'm your host, Nick. I'm also joined by Richard. We're hoping to bring Richard on like more often as he has time, and we're gonna kind of move towards more like a co-host kind of deal. And I kind of wanted everybody to be kind of involved in that, but just kind of let you know that that's what's going to be happening here. But to go back to what you said, Richard, I think that that's a point. This conversation is an illustration of the greater struggle, ideological struggle of the left in general. Like, this is not just, I agree in some aspects that this is not just about these two people. Like, I believe it's more than that. And at the same time, these two people also represent something very, very clear and very, very important. And that is, are you going to take the view that it's about the individual, and like your politics are going to be based on your experiences individually and the social climate that you exist in? Or is it going to take that next step and start examining the power structure that's all around you that shapes those social circumstances? That's really what Coates versus Cornel is really pointing out to me. If I were to levy a critique of Cornel, I think his problem in many instances is that sometimes he fails to cater to who he's talking to. And what I mean by that is, a lot of times when you have an internationalist perspective, and you're talking to people specifically in the United States, they don't want to hear an internationalist perspective. That doesn't mean that the internationalist perspective is not important. That doesn't mean you don't weave it in. But just like those comedians that chop it up and they put comedy in between to feed it to you in ways that you can absorb and digest and take, you also need to have your politics. You have to insert things that are important into people and connect them to these struggles and feed it to them bit by bit. That's something that you have to do when you're trying to basically be a thought leader and kind of move the populace along. You have to kind of mix in what's popular with what people may not have been exposed to, mix it together, connect the dots, and then draw people in. And I think sometimes Cornel, when he's speaking to people who may have a focus on particular issues, may forget to do that because he's been so used to seeing everything as all connected. But at the same time, he's not laying the groundwork, putting down a foundation by which people can understand that it's all connected, and it can really be important to them, and they can see where it kind of locks together.
Well, and there's so many different ways that we see it play out. One example that comes to my mind is Haiti, and I mentioned in the conversation before this a bit of how in the video that's linked in the description about how Papa Doc in Haiti and how that translates to what we're facing today. And it's not just, there's countless examples around the world of how our failure to engage with these ideas have in the United States has resulted in us allowing politicians to do unspeakable things in our names around the world. And I think for a lot of Americans, it's really, really uncomfortable to confront what that reality means: the oppressed people, the starving people, the suffering, the just outright atrocities, the bombings, the maiming, the mines and unexploded ordnance that we have scattered throughout the world. Like, when you really start to think and engage with the amount of horror and atrocity that the United States is engaged in, and the lingering consequences that go on long after the news reports of or the news reports have gone, and so on and so forth, it's hard to grasp for a lot of people and hard to deal with, and our brains are specifically wired to prevent us from having to do that. And so overcoming those hurdles is going to take a concerted effort and a lot of thought, and it's going to take both at the individual level and a lot of theory at the macro and aerial view.
Yeah, let me come in on that. It's very, very important that you bring that up. Like, sometimes, people, we become involved in our own thing, right? Again, it's the individual again, right? We're looking at our own thing and we're saying, like, I don't care about what's happening to them. I want you to talk about what's happening to me. But it's like, you don't understand. You are them. They are you. Like, it's the same thing, different circumstance, but very, very similar. The modes are about the same. They are you, just over there. They are you in that continuum. Obviously politics changes, right? There's politics all around the globe. There's the global politics and there's domestic, right? In America, Black people are the Rohingya or the Palestinians. We are all the same, just in different parts of the world, suffering under the same exact thing. That's literally what it is. And it is hard to get people to understand that because they're not, necessarily versed in world politics. But when Cornel West is talking about it, that's what he's talking about. And it kind of falls on deaf ears because we don't see that. And that's a problem. But at the same time, Cornel West should know that this is a problem. And he needs to calibrate what he's saying, weave it together, connect the dots for folks, and then bring it home. So his critique lands a lot more squarely and people are really able to really take in what he's talking about. And at the same time, nobody wants to know they live in a dystopia. Nobody wants to know that they don't have adequate representation. Nobody wants to know that they don't have power. Nobody wants to know that they don't have agency. That's something we individually may not want to grasp for ourselves. But at the same time, an inability to reckon with reality is a huge handicap. And we just need to shed that. We need to shed that if we are to move forward. And so when I say that, it comes to a point where it's like, hey, when you speak to politicians, or when you speak to people, sometimes you're going to have something told to you that you may not like. And you may not like the way it's told to you, but that doesn't change whether or not it's true. Have you ever had a friend? That's just rough around the edges, abrasive, but tells it like it is, and you like them for it? Have you ever had anybody that that, spoke really eloquently and really sweetly and sugarcoated everything, and for some reason you just never liked them? It's like a drain. It's like draining, tapped into having to try to interpret what they may have meant and what they said because they're kind of manipulative. They always kind of say things that have double meanings and things like that. You're never really sure where they are. You know those type of people, right? Do you know anybody like that, Richard?
I feel like I'm both those people sometimes.
But look, this is what I'll tell you. Why is it that people that are brash, vulgar, straight up and upfront, why are they such a breath of fresh air? Because a lot of people aren't like that, and it's annoying and it's draining to have to deal with people that aren't like that. So sometimes, there's a sort of attraction to people that do these things, but at the same time, we don't want anybody to tell us the uncomfortable truth. And I think we just kind of need to become an adult. Sometimes you might not like what he says. You might not like the way he says it. You might not like how personal he gets. But in the end, none of that matters. What matters is there validity in what he's saying or not? Are you adult enough to face an ugly truth or not?
You can't be any more mad about how they said it than you are about what they're talking about. And when we're talking about, ethnic cleansing of the Palestinian people, or we're talking about the support of ethnic cleansing by the Jewish state elsewhere, or we're talking about, the United States and their various, horrible, they're overthrowing democratically elected leaders, assassination attempts, spending 40, 50 years trying to kill Castro, when we're talking about those things, it may not be comfortable and you may want to rationalize and justify, but I think it's valuable, and especially it's hardest when it's about you personally, like what we saw with Coates and West. It's the hardest when it's about you personally, or it affects something critical or structural to your worldview. But rather than be defensive, it's incredibly valuable to at least take a bit of time to think about what validity there could be in there, because even sometimes, broken clock is right twice a day is one of the expressions. And so sometimes the person that's critiquing you may be somebody that has, in your opinion, and maybe rightfully so, very little things of value to contribute. But occasionally those critiques can be valuable. So if you're able to do it with the people that you respect the least, then it should be much easier to build the habit of doing it with the people that you trust and respect.
A lot of times when it comes to deception, one of the easiest and deception 101 is always they go to flattery. They want to flatter you. They want to, use like honeyed words and make you feel a certain way, to make you feel good about yourself, but leave you empty. Like they just leave you empty after the conversation's gone. You'd be like, wait a minute, I was supposed to talk about something completely different. And then where you left at, you're looking like, man, I didn't ask him this or I didn't ask him that, because you let them come in with some honeyed words and like a silver tongue, and next thing you know, they played word games with you for 30 minutes and then they just left you there. And it's just like you didn't really get anything done. And there was a study that was put out that talked about people who speak very vulgarly, people who speak very brashly. A lot of times these people are more honest. So you have to be careful when you're talking to people that are eloquent and they really put words together well. Like it's a skill, but a lot of times, that skill is used for deception and manipulation. It's very, very easy for those two to kind of run together. And so like, because of that, and we inherently know that, because a lot of times when we find somebody who's honest and abrasive and vulgar, those people are very, very charismatic, because people value that honesty, and we value it because it's rare. We value it because it's scarce amongst people, amongst society. That's why we value it, to be honest with you. Whether you want to admit it or not, that's what it is.
Well, one thing I would also note is that we tend to value it much more from attractive people that have those personality traits rather than unattractive people that have those personality traits. I think being open and brash and all those types of things when you're unattractive tends to leave you more secluded. And so I think that there's an aspect of that as well. I think, intersectionality of everything, of course, but I think that plays a role as well in our society.
See, I don't know. I think there is some truth there. I'm not so ready to just sign on to it. I can see it in some aspects. I can see it like push back in other aspects. Because sometimes, it's the people that aren't necessarily the most attractive that are that way. And it works for them because that's just who they are.
I feel
they
like
have
it's
a strong, charismatic personality. But you're right. Sometimes good looks does help in terms of charisma.
I feel like it's perceived as more honest or truthful when the person when people feel like the person doesn't have anything to gain personally from taking the other person down. And so however that dynamic plays out, I think plays a role. So I wouldn't say that. I'd say it's something like a 60-40 split or something like that. It's not overwhelmingly dominant one way or the other. But rather than get too sidetracked, go ahead.
And look at here. Look at this. Excuse me, I'm saying look at here. Obviously I'm from Texas, right? Look at this. We have a situation where, really, to be honest with you, Ta-Nehisi Coates kind of like rose in popularity fairly quickly, and we have to ask ourselves, excuse me, plural, have to ask ourselves, who gave him this platform and for what purpose? Perhaps it's because he didn't ask the certain questions that probably needed to be asked, or threaten power in any significant way, that he has this platform that allows him to reach this many people. I don't know. I mean, I'm lying to you. I totally know. It's probably 100%. That's exactly the reason why he has this platform, because he doesn't make powerful people feel uncomfortable. That's probably exactly what it is, because he has a very neutralizing way of doing politics, of bringing you all the way to the precipice of change and then just leaving you out in the middle of nowhere with no explanation for it.
Well, and he's perfectly inflammatory for the other side. Like
and for what reason, though? I don't understand why you would get mad at somebody saying what he says. Like, he makes the good moral case, but then he just leaves it disconnected and in the middle of nowhere, and you're just like, okay.
Well, you can't be more perfect. Like something like, oh, Trump's the first white president. Something like that does not fit the idea of the liberal academic better to a Trump supporter than the Coates does with something like that. Like,
and see,
that is
what's weird about
it fits perfectly.
What's weird about it? That's inflammatory to me, because it's just like every president we've had has been a white president.
Yeah, well, and that's,
including the one you think wasn't.
And so what that immediately leads to, is that, oh, well, you and the white supremacists both agree that it's stupid to say that Trump's the first white president, although you're saying it for completely different reasons and with completely different future intentions to build off of that argument.
I would definitely say that, like, in terms of like some of the stuff that he has talked about, that was definitely in that low point there. Like, the fawning for Obama was incessant and barely tolerable. And then, the same things like, we were in power for 8 years when that couldn't have been further from the truth, and then, of course, just start getting ahistorical all of a sudden, start saying things like Donald Trump is the first white president, when, in actuality, every president we've ever had has been white, like everyone, including Barack Obama.
Yep.
He's half white. Remember that, people. Yep. and look, I know race is like a touchy thing. I know ethnicity is fluid and all of that. But let's be clear. There was categories created for people to separate people, right? It was only black and white. You started adding more categories because there were other groups that came that said, hey, we don't share necessarily the same dark skin tone, and we don't want to be treated like them. So you will treat us better than them. And then, other people were like, well, we'll treat you better than them, but you're not the same as us, so you won't get treated the same as us. And then you kind of have this weird kind of stratification, kind of like a order is kind of created, like based on whatever group you are. But ultimately, if you're in one of those two dominant categories, white or black, all those other categories, they just exist to not be black and not be white, to be somewhere in between. And then they'll jockey for position in that order amongst one another, and they'll kind of jockey. But if you're black, let's be clear that when somebody asserts that they're not black and they're not white and blah, 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 in a dichotomy that was already just black and white, what they're trying to say is they're not you, they're better than you, and they're willing to assimilate into this structure and just be less than the white person. And they're all right with that as long as they're not you. That's really kind of how it kind of shapes out. And that's really unfortunate.
And what the modern landscape is telling you is the neoliberals are telling you, if you're a neoliberal, then you can be an American, and we can create this new category separate from race where you're an American and it will stratify separately, and you'll be included in that group as opposed to being separate. So rather than be black and white, be the two categories, it'll be American and non-American. And you can either get included in that category by subscribing to these neoliberal ideas, or you can get excluded and be branded a communist, whatever the term of the day will be.
Yeah, and let's be clear, you already have a structure in place, right? The only reason why you want to get rid of that structure is because it's not beneficial to you, right? So after you've benefited from that structure, it's no longer useful. Now it serves as some sort of almost like an evidence of the damage you've done, right? Through the history. Now you want to say, well, we're all mixed and these categories don't exist anymore. So I want to erase the past and not reckon with it and not pay recompense for the injustices dealt under such an order. And I just want to start from scratch and say, well, we're all Americans. Like, no. We're not all American. There was an order in place, an unjust order. And just saying that unjust order is no longer useful, we'll get rid of it, doesn't change the injustice. There has to be amelioration for the conditions caused by that order. That has to be done. And I think I think when Ta-Nehisi Coates mentioned this to Obama, he did, to his credit, he mentioned reparations in the same space where Obama was in the room. And you know what? Considering where his politics are, at least he did that. He did that. He didn't challenge him. He didn't really fight him on it. He just mentioned it in passing, and he kind of let Barack Obama like skate away, basically. But I can understand where if you ask a tough question like that with the president, how the interview can end very, very quickly, and you could be finding yourself out the door, because he can do that whenever he wants to. He gets uncomfortable, he's out of there. So I can understand, but like at least try to spring a trap on him, lure him in, and then get him talking, in passing and feign indifference, but in actuality, you're just like chomping at the bit. You're playing the eloquent game, right? Like you're manipulating the conversation to bring it where you want to bring it. And then you're trying to like basically hold him and make him answer some tough questions. And then you let him go. Don't let him squirm too much. He can get away. But look, ultimately, those are my thoughts. And I think this conversation between Coates and wait. I'm sorry. He let Obama get away with it. But Obama said something that really stuck out to me that didn't make any sense. He said, I don't think current immigrants would appreciate, contributing to a system that benefits African Americans. And what I would say to that is, if it weren't for the struggle of African Americans, immigrants wouldn't be able to come here and have rights at all. So, like, let's just be clear. Like, you don't think that they would appreciate having to give something back to the people who struggle, whose ancestors struggled, so they even have any kind of rights when they get here? That doesn't make any sense. If immigrants have a problem,
and I don't actually think they would continue.
I mean, to contributing to something that gave them the right to come to the country and take advantage of the opportunities that are here, then what that means is somewhere in the immigration process, we have failed to teach them the responsibilities of being an American. Like somewhere along the line, we failed. And it's because we didn't teach properly. Hey, in the United States, Black people did X, Y, and Z. These people suffered in this way. We didn't even have this right to let people come here until this happened. And these people struggled for this. And they made it so that everybody has rights. If that was a common knowledge, when you say, hey, we're going to give reparations to Black people who suffered all this injustice over generations, you wouldn't say like, well, I don't agree with that. I just don't agree with that. And then on top of that, there's a second critique. Everybody who pays into this system, there's a second and third critique, right? There's second and third. I'm going to say the second one right now. Everybody who pays into the system may not agree with everything that goes on in the system, but there's some ways in which you benefit, and there's some ways that other people may not want to pay into for that and pay for this and pay for that. Like you don't just pay for what you want to pay for. That's not how that works. You pay into the system, and then it's decided how the money is going to be divvied out, and you have input, but you're not the sole decider. Of these things. Collectively, you may have more influence than you individually, but that's just not how it works. And then the third thing that I would say is you made a choice to come to America. And after you got here, you make a choice to stay. So like, let's say you get to America and that's just the way it is in America. At a certain point, it's just like, this is what it means to be an American. It means that you came here to America and you are going to be a part of America, benefit from things that America has. And also that means you're going to have to suffer doing some of the things America has to do to clear injustices of its past that created the benefits that you're now benefiting from. It's only fair. Elementary fairness. And it's not even simple. That's not even a simple case. I'm simplifying it, but that's literally what it is.
Well, and I get down on America a lot, but I do think it is kind of an amazing system that, at least in theory, and if we lived up to our ideals, that we could have, people come from countries that we've unfortunately or systematically, however you want to describe it, exploited. They can come here and influence the policy eventually that the U.S. applies across into the whatever nation that they may have immigrated from, oftentimes as a result of the exploitation of the people by the United States. So as terrible and as unfortunate many of the consequences of our system, and as often as disheartened and and just generally disbelieving of the idea that we can fix it, I do think it does have some rather impressive features like that. And so I from my experience, speaking with immigrants, there wouldn't be much resistance from that, other than a particular type of immigrant that is generally an affluent immigrant that is coming as a result of economic opportunities in the United States, but is coming with lots of capital already. For the people that are plan on coming to the United States to be part of the American dream that they've been more or less propagandized into, the idea that they would contribute to the black people that were exploited in order to help build this country, I think would be a point of pride rather than a point of regret.
And then on top of that, what I would say is, if not, we failed somewhere. Perhaps part of the curriculum, part of being American, part of what it means to be American is to take on the injustices committed by America and basically make those injustices right, to right those wrongs historically in present time. That's just part of what being an American is. And to that same token, there are people that will make arguments, a very, U.S. centric argument that say, well, African Americans or oppressed groups in America, if you want to just go there, just say oppressed groups in America in general are not responsible for, American interventions abroad and things that happen abroad that cause immigrants to have to come here in the first place. What I would say is everybody who lives in a democracy is partially responsible. Now, they're not equally responsible, but they do inherit some responsibility, because I haven't seen, it's been a long time, the Black Power movement and the radical Black movements of the 60s and things of that nature. The radical side, they were a peace and justice organization with an internationalist perspective. Historically, they were. But somewhere along the line, we just kind of lost that. And now we're trying to figure out kind of like where we are. But I think when you look at Coates and you look at West, this argument is basically indicative of kind of like where it is today. Like, people want to defend Coates, and they seem to feel like, he's done enough for us, and that, he should be above critique. I'm saying he's not above critique. And if you have a critique of Cornel West, throw it out there. It all stands. Everything is fair game if you want to engage in debate and you want to be a thought leader in the public square. Everything is fair game. But I think this debate, these two different ideologies, you can say one person's just not well versed in radical theory and et cetera, et cetera. He can feign ignorance, but he has to still be held responsible for his negligence when he fawned all over Obama, despite the clear and present evidence of damage perpetrated by that president, someone who's supported lovingly by Black Americans, by Black people in America, and liberals themselves, without ever having to really face consequences for the many bad decisions that he did make. And I think that that's fair. Like, you have to take responsibility for those actions, and part of those responsibilities is going to be critiques like these, and they're going to be very, very poignant, right? They're going to be very, very apt because you did it, and you have to reckon with that. Now, if you say you didn't know, et cetera, there are people who do know. You have a big platform. There are hundreds of academics. There are hundreds of autodidacts. People have written tons of work. There's a lot of scholarly work out there, that will kind of bring you through all these disparate issues, kind of bring them together. And you can be doing that as a part of your project, bringing all that stuff together and exposing it to the people. You have a talent in explaining things. You have a talent in making emotional appeals. You can do that and bring that to the populace and use that platform to do that work. You can do that. That's something you can do. Now, maybe you might not have that platform anymore. I'm not sure. I don't know how the powers that be or what your relationship with the platform is, how making somebody uncomfortable may lead to you not having that platform, but you have it right now, and you can use it a little bit better than you can. And if you're not using it for those things, there's not really much value in the platform if you're not using it in a way that really moves Black politics forward. If you're going to be Black centric, which is, kind of what your history suggests you're trying to be. Do you have anything to say?
No, I just want to again thank you for having me on. Want to thank everybody for watching. Make sure to check out the previous discussion that this is extended from. Check out the video that I'm probably going to link in there, and just like, share, subscribe, all the good stuff. Appreciate it. a lot of these conversations are pretty much therapeutic for myself, but I appreciate that other people are getting something from them, and I enjoy speaking with you, Nick, and I look forward to having more conversations.
Yeah, I want to drive one last point home.
Mm-hmm.
This conversation is not between these random men. It's not a personal conversation. This is like two very different ways of looking at politics. And I would argue that in this particular conflict, I think Cornel West's critique is apt, and I think it sticks. If you have critiques of Cornel West about how he had relationships with people that took advantage of black people or something like that, levy those critiques. But that doesn't mean, or if you had a problem with the way he attacked Obama in a personal way, levy those critiques. But guess what? Nothing he said was incorrect. Maybe the one little part that got a little bit too personal kind of just gave you what you needed to ignore all of what he said. We got to be adults. If he said something vulgar, if he said something that was too personal, what's the substance of what he's talking about? Is it right or is it not right? And how are we going to deal with that? The personal stuff between two people, that's not important. What's important is there's an ideological difference in how these two people approach politics. And I think where we fall on that spectrum is important to politics, not just for Black America, but for America in general, for the left in general. And that's why I want to talk about it.
And I think it's really important, and I think that the conversation that they had can provide a lot of insight when you think about how it affected you personally and where you find yourself relating to either of their arguments. And I'm hoping that there's a lot of black people that are, just caught up in a lot of the propaganda and are starting to see the light and starting to see that there's a lot of black people out there in the media that are leading them astray, giving them bad information and leading them down a path that isn't going to lead to the liberation that the people that are leading them say that they're leading them towards, or that the people that are being led are seeking. And I can only hope that more people are waking up every day.
All right. Well, say goodnight to everybody. Oh, one last thing. No, actually, I'm not going to say anything else. Let's go ahead and close it out. Good night, everybody.
Night.